She was slicing an apple when she said it, casual, as if she were commenting on the weather. Her eyes never even met mine, just that smug little smirk in the corner of her mouth as she leaned on the counter, knife tapping against the cutting board. "Go ahead, move out," she tossed over her shoulder, like she was granting me permission to leave her kingdom. No argument, no drama, just the cold efficiency of someone who had already decided I didn't matter. The knife hit the board one last time, and she popped a slice into her mouth, chewing slow, savoring her own audacity. I didn't give her the show she wanted. No raised voice, no pleading, no sarcastic comeback to make her roll her eyes. I just let the silence hang, long enough for her to glance up, expecting a reaction. When she didn't get it, her smirk twitched. I walked past her without a word, my hand brushing against the doorframe to the bedroom like I was wiping her fingerprints off me. I pulled my old duffel bag from under the bed, the same one I'd used when I first moved in here years ago, when I was good enough to bring into the family fold. As I started folding shirts, I caught my reflection in the dresser mirror. Not angry, not even sad, just calculating. My eyes had that same narrow focus I'd get before closing a deal back in the days when I still trusted people like her. From the kitchen, she kept talking, not to me, but to herself, loud enough for me to hear. "You've been miserable here anyway. You'll land on your feet. Or maybe not." That last part had a little laugh in it, the kind that's supposed to feel harmless but cuts deeper than outright cruelty. Her father's voice echoed in my head. The last Thanksgiving, he leaned across the table, half drunk, and told me, "You're lucky to be here, son. My daughter could do better." I'd smiled politely back then, kept my temper. I saw now she'd adopted his philosophy wholesale. The more I packed, the quieter she got. She wasn't expecting me to comply so easily. In her mind, I was supposed to resist, fight her, prove I cared enough to stay. But I wasn't going to play by her script. This wasn't a surrender, it was an opening. I zipped the bag, grabbed my jacket from the closet. She looked up from her phone when I walked back through the kitchen, her eyebrows raising in mock surprise. "You're actually going?" I met her eyes for the first time that morning. "You told me to." My voice was even, almost bored. She smirked again, but this time it looked forced. "Well, good luck out there," she said, like a landlord waving off a departing tenant. I stepped outside into the cold air, duffel strap digging into my shoulder, and let the door click shut behind me. The air tasted cleaner already. She thought she'd just erased me from her picture. What she didn't know was that I'd just stepped off her board entirely, and I was taking my pieces with me. Walking down the path to my truck, I looked at the rutted gravel under my boots. That road had history. So did I. And in my back pocket was a memory of a piece of paper that no one in that house had thought about in years. A piece of paper with my name on it, and a clause that could change everything. She thought move out meant vanish. To me, it meant move strategically. She'd just pushed me into the one position she'd never wanted me to be in, outside her walls, holding the keys to her gates. The apartment was barely furnished, just a bed, a table, and a chair, but the steel filing cabinet in the corner was older than the building itself. I'd bought it at an estate sale a decade ago, its weight and stubborn drawers a perfect fit for the kind of documents you only open when the world is about to change. That night, with the glow from a single lamp cutting shadows across the peeling paint, I slid the bottom drawer open and let the metallic scrape fill the silence. The smell hit first, old paper and dust, the scent of something that had been sealed away for years. Inside were rolled survey maps with fraying edges, deed copies stamped in fading blue ink, and contracts bound with rusted paper clips. I'd kept them all because I knew one day they might matter again. Not to me, but against someone else. I unrolled the biggest map, weighing the corners down with a coffee mug and my pocket knife. It was the county survey of her family's property, every fence line, creek bed, and, most importantly, the long, narrow gravel road that cut through my old parcel before it reached their land. Most people looking at it would see just a road. I saw the only artery keeping their farm alive. My fingers found the easement agreement, folded twice and yellowed with age. The signatures were still crisp. Her father's name scrawled in thick pen, my name in block letters beneath, and the county recorder's seal in the corner. The date jumped out, 10 years ago, when they were desperate for repairs on that road and couldn't afford the contractors. I'd stepped in, paid every dime, under one very specific condition. The access rights to that road were mine. Not shared, not leased. Mine. Over the years, they'd grown complacent. Her father strutted around at county fairs, talking about how no one could touch our land, as if the world owed him an unbreakable bubble. They'd forgotten that the bubble had a valve, and I was the one who could shut it off. I sat back in my chair, the paper under my hands feeling heavier now. This wasn't just leverage. It was a loaded weapon that had been gathering dust in my possession, waiting for the right trigger. And today, she had pulled it without even knowing. The bitterness was there, coiling in my gut, but it was tempered by something sharper: calculation. She thought moving out meant I was walking away from her world. What she didn't realize was that part of her world still belonged to me, and it was the part they couldn't live without. I smoothed the paper flat one last time, tracing the bold black line of that road with my fingertip. It looked so ordinary on paper, a single strip of ink between two parcels of land. But in reality, it was the lifeline for every tractor, delivery truck, and harvest load they had. And now, it was about to become the choke point. The agreement was still valid. No expiration, no loopholes for family exemptions. I'd made sure of that back then, not because I didn't trust them at the time, but because I knew people change. Gratitude fades. Promises get rewritten in the other person's favor. Paper, though, paper remembers exactly what was signed. I refolded the document, slid it into a leather portfolio, and locked the cabinet again. The click of that lock was final, almost ceremonial. This wasn't about petty payback anymore. It was about taking control of a situation she thought I'd lost. And by morning, I know exactly who to call to help me turn this old piece of paper into a brand new problem for her family. The card was still in my hand. They just didn't know the game had restarted. 10 years earlier, I was standing in nearly the same spot on that road, though back then it was more crater than gravel. A brutal spring storm had washed out half the access, turning it into a muddy trench that could swallow a truck's axle whole. Their farm was bleeding money. Trucks couldn't get in, feed deliveries were delayed, and her father was on the phone every day, barking at the county for help that never came. I was younger then, still under the illusion that marrying into their family meant becoming part of it. I had the savings from a big contract I'd closed that winter, and when I offered to pay for the repairs, it wasn't charity. It was a calculated investment. But even in generosity, I set my terms. I remember laying it out over coffee at their kitchen table. I'll front every cent. In exchange, you transfer full access rights to me. Her father had laughed, slapping the table like I'd just told the smartest joke he'd ever heard. Hell, if you're paying for it, you can own the whole damn road. We signed the paperwork that afternoon. I remember the way her father's pen dug into the paper, like he wanted the county clerk to feel his gratitude. They couldn't have been happier. Her mother even baked me a pie the next day. Back then, they saw it as a lifeline. I saw it as an insurance policy. The repairs were finished in weeks, the road better than it had ever been. Gravel laid thick, drainage fixed, a smooth enough surface for semis to pass without rattling apart. It wasn't long before the farm was back to humming, and with it, their pride. Pride so big, in fact, it left no room for the memory of who had made it possible. Years passed, and the story they told changed. My contribution became a family effort, then an arrangement with a friend, and finally, just another piece of their untouchable empire. Her father especially liked to puff out his chest at county events, telling anyone who'd listen, "No one can touch our land. We've been here 3 generations, and no outsiders got a say." I'd stand there, drink in hand, listening to him rewrite history in real time. But I never corrected him. I never reminded him that the one road in and out was tied to my name in the county records. I let him talk, because I knew that memory lapses can be dangerous. Dangerous for the one who forgets, and very profitable for the one who remembers. And now, sitting in my apartment with that folded easement in front of me, I realized just how deep their forgetfulness ran. They had built their sense of invincibility on a piece of land that wasn't truly theirs to control. Every truckload of feed, every buyer coming to inspect cattle, every harvest leaving their property, it all had to pass over that strip of gravel. It wasn't just access. It was oxygen. And I owned the valve. That old bargain, signed in a moment of desperation, had aged like fine wine. The ink hadn't faded, and neither had my awareness of what it meant. Back then, I thought maybe one day it might give me leverage in a business deal or during a neighborly dispute. I hadn't imagined using it to gut their entire operation. But then again, I hadn't imagined my wife smirking in our kitchen, telling me to go ahead and move out, like I was a stray dog she was shooing off the porch. Their security had always been my gift. All I had to do now was take it back. And I would, surgically, legally, without a single raised voice. I hadn't spoken to Evan in nearly 7 years, not since we'd run into each other at a mutual friend's wedding. Back in college, he'd been the kind of guy who could smell an opportunity the way a shark smells blood. While I'd gone into more traditional work, Evan had taken his degree, rolled the dice in real estate, and never looked back. Last I heard, he was the man behind half the industrial parks and upscale housing developments springing up in the county. He didn't just have money, he had reach. I sat at my small kitchen table, the easement agreement lying flat in front of me, my phone in hand. My thumb hovered over his contact for a moment. This wasn't a call you made lightly. If I opened this door, there was no going back, not for me, and definitely not for them. Then I pictured her leaning against that counter, telling me to go ahead, move out, like I was disposable. My thumb hit call. Evan picked up on the third ring, his voice exactly the same. Confident, a little amused, like every conversation was a chess match he was already winning. Well, I was just thinking about you the other day, he lied easily. What's got you calling me after all this time? I've got something, I said, keeping my tone even. Something that will make you very rich and make certain people very miserable. That got his attention. His voice shifted, interest sharpening instantly. Go on. I told him about the road. Not the whole story, just the facts that mattered to him. Privately owned, sole legal access to a large piece of agricultural land. Prime position for leverage. Locked in by an agreement with no expiration. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him calculating on the other end. You're saying this road is their only way in or out. Exactly, and you own it outright. Until I decide otherwise. He let out a low whistle. That's interesting. Very interesting. What are you looking to do with it? I want it sold. To someone who can use it effectively. And quietly. The less attention we draw before it's finalized, the better. There was a pause, then the sound of him leaning back in his chair. I knew that sound from our college poker games. It meant he was all in, but already thinking about how to make the pot bigger. I can make that happen. I've got an LLC we can run it through. Clean transfer, no one the wiser until it's done. But you understand, once it's in my hands, I'll be creative with it. That's the idea. He laughed then, the kind of laugh that never bodes well for someone else. All right, send me the details. We'll make this fast. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel vengeful. I felt prepared. This wasn't about throwing a punch. It was about setting up a structure so heavy that, when it fell, it would crush everything underneath without me ever having to touch it again. The weapon was chosen. And the best part? I wouldn't be the one swinging it. The notary's office was one of those places you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Wedged between a dry cleaner and a shuttered bakery, blinds half drawn, a faded, open sign flickering in the window. Perfect for what I needed. No fanfare, no curious onlookers, just a desk, a pen, and a legal seal. Evan was already there when I arrived, sitting with that relaxed, predatory posture of a man who knows he's about to acquire something valuable for far less than it's worth. The easement agreement lay on the table in front of him, alongside a fresh contract he'd drafted through his LLC. I glanced over the new paperwork, line by line. No surprises, he'd kept his word. Every access right, every maintenance responsibility, every legal inch of that gravel road would now belong to him. The notary, a man in his 60s with tired eyes, slid the documents toward me. Sign here. And here. His voice was flat, businesslike. He didn't ask questions, didn't care what this transaction meant beyond the ink. That was good. Questions were dangerous. I took the pen and signed with a steady hand. My name appeared in bold strokes, and just like that, a decade-old promise transformed into a modern weapon. I slid the papers back across the desk, and Evan added his signature beneath mine. The notary stamped each page with a heavy clunk of his seal, that deep imprint locking the deal into the county's records. Evan gave me a thin smile. Once this is filed, it's mine. I'll have the wire sent before the ink's even dry. True to his word, my phone buzzed with a bank notification before we even left the building. The lump sum hit an account she didn't even know existed, one I'd opened years ago for future projects. It was more than enough to start over, but this wasn't about starting over. It was about ensuring she never stood on solid ground again. As we stepped outside, the late afternoon light cut sharp shadows across the street. Evan tucked the folder under his arm like a man carrying a loaded gun, which, in a way, he was. Give it a week, he said, unlocking his car. By then, they'll know. But they won't understand until it's too late. I nodded, watching him drive off, the documents riding shotgun. The street was quiet again, the notary's blinds still half drawn, as if nothing significant had just happened. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Unnoticed, undisturbed, lethal in its invisibility. By law, Evan now controlled the only road leading to their farm. Every tractor, delivery truck, and cattle hauler would pass through his hands. And because I'd handed it over cleanly, I was untouchable. If anyone came looking for the person who had taken away their lifeline, they'd find a corporation with a polished lawyer, not me. Walking back to my truck, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't known in weeks. This wasn't the shaky adrenaline of a heated fight. It was the quiet satisfaction of placing the final piece in a puzzle I'd been building for a decade. The fuse was lit. They just didn't know the fire was crawling toward them yet. 3 days later, the first ripple hit. A feed delivery truck, one of those long-haul rigs stacked with grain pallets, rolled up the gravel road toward the farm, same as it had every other week for years. But this time, it didn't make it past the tree line. A brand new steel gate blocked the path, the kind you'd see guarding an industrial yard, not a country lane. There was a small booth beside it, manned by a stocky guard in a dark jacket, clipboard in hand. The driver leaned out his window. "Gates closed. What's going on?" The guard flipped a page on his clipboard. "New ownership. Private road now. Toll fees due before entry." The driver laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Yeah, right. Let me through. I've got a schedule to keep." "No fee, no entry," the guard said flatly, stepping closer. "Your company should have been notified." It took all of 10 minutes for the call to reach the farmhouse. Her father, already suspicious whenever anything disrupted his routine, stormed out the door, coat half on, muttering curses. He drove down to the gate himself, dust kicking up behind his truck. "You can't block this road. This is our land," he barked, before the guard could even greet him. The guard didn't flinch. "Sir, the road is now privately owned by Redline Development LLC. You'll need to speak with them about ongoing access. The county records were updated last week." Her father's voice rose. "County records? This road's been in our family for generations." The guard's eyes stayed on his clipboard. "Not according to the easement agreement on file. I'm just here to enforce what's already signed." That was the first moment, just a flicker, where I'm told his confidence cracked. He drove straight to his office in town and called the county clerk, demanding they fix the mistake. The clerk's answer was polite but final. The transaction was legitimate, recorded, and irreversible without the consent of the current owner, Redline Development. By that afternoon, the truck was still parked on the side of the road, driver leaning against the hood, smoking while he waited for instructions. The farmhands started whispering about what it meant. A few of them remembered my name being on old paperwork. Most didn't connect the dots yet. Back at the farmhouse, she stood in the doorway, watching her father pace. She wasn't worried, not yet. She figured it was some kind of bureaucratic mix-up, one phone call away from being undone. But he knew better, even if he didn't say it out loud. He'd dealt with developers before. Developers didn't buy something unless they planned to squeeze every drop of value from it. And if they controlled the only road in, that value was about to come directly from his pocket. It wasn't fear yet, just annoyance and unease. But unease spreads. And once it takes root, it doesn't let go. By the next morning, the unease had calcified into something harder. Her father summoned everyone to the farmhouse dining room. Siblings, spouses, even the cousin who only ever showed up when he smelled free food. The long oak table was covered in papers, printouts from the county registry, photographs of the new gate, and a copy of the toll schedule Redline Development had sent over by courier. He didn't waste time on small talk. "This is extortion," he barked, slamming his palm against the table so hard a coffee cup rattled. "No outsider is going to choke us off from our own land." Her brother muttered something about just driving through anyway, but her father shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. And get arrested for trespassing? That's exactly what they'd want. The family lawyer, a man who'd been on their payroll for decades, sat quietly at the far end of the table. When her father finally turned to him, demanding options, the lawyer cleared his throat and slid a folder across. Inside was a photocopy of the easement contract, the county seal bright as the day it had been filed. "This is the problem," the lawyer said evenly. "It's not a mistake, and it's not extortion. This is perfectly legal. Whoever sold this," he tapped the top of the page, "had every right to do so. The buyer now owns full control of the road." Her father's voice boomed. "So we sue. We'll drag them into court until they beg to sell it back." The lawyer didn't even look up. You'll lose. The language is airtight. It was signed willingly, and it has no expiration clause. It's as valid today as it was when it was written. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Your only realistic option is to negotiate, which, judging from this toll schedule, won't be cheap. The schedule was brutal, a flat fee for every vehicle entering or leaving, plus maintenance surcharges that spiked during harvest months. Her sister-in-law whispered the math under her breath, numbers that, over a season, could eat their profits alive. Her father paced, jaw clenched, muttering about how no one does this to us. But the more he ranted, the clearer it became to everyone in the room. They were trapped. Every bale of hay, every feed truck, every head of cattle had to pass through that gate. And every time it did, Redline got richer. She sat near the window, arms crossed, eyes darting between the papers and her father. She still didn't say my name, but I could see it in her face. She was starting to wonder. And that was fine. Wondering meant the seed had been planted. The meeting dragged on for hours, but by the end, the conclusion was unavoidable. They could either pay the tolls or watch the farm wither. No one liked it, but no one had a better answer. It was the first time in his life her father had been cornered without a single move left on the board. And I wasn't even in the room yet. It was almost midnight when the knock came. Not the casual tap of a neighbor or the rhythmic pound of a delivery. This was sharp, insistent, urgent. I already knew who it was before I even reached the door. She stood in the hallway under the dim yellow light, hair pulled back in a messy knot, coat thrown over her pajamas. Her eyes were wide, not from surprise but from the kind of restless anger that burns hotter the more it's contained. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped forward until she was inches from me, her breath quick in the cold air. You did this. Her voice wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a verdict she'd already passed. I leaned on the doorframe, letting the silence stretch. Her gaze darted over my face, looking for the smallest twitch of guilt, some sign that she'd caught me red-handed. I gave her nothing. When I finally spoke, my tone was almost conversational. You told me to move out. I let the words settle, then added, I just moved my property. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, recognition, maybe even understanding, but it was quickly drowned in anger. You're going to ruin everything, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done to my family? I almost laughed at my family. Not our family. Not once had she used that word for me in months, and now she expected it to sting? She switched tactics. Her voice softened, lips trembling in a performance she'd perfected over the years. This doesn't have to be like this. We can talk. We can work something out, just you and me. I watched her, almost curious to see if she'd dig any deeper into the act. When she realized the softness wasn't landing, she snapped back into fury. You're pathetic. This is petty. You're going to regret it. Her words hit the air and fell flat. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply stepped back and put my hand on the edge of the door. Good night. Her face tightened, a mix of disbelief and frustration, as the door began to swing shut. She didn't step forward to stop it. She just stood there, breathing hard, until the latch clicked and the world on my side of the wood went quiet again. I stood for a moment, hand still on the door, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Not guilt, not triumph, just a deep, steady calm. She had come here expecting to bargain, threaten, or shame me into undoing what was already set in motion. Instead, she'd walked away with the confirmation she feared most. I wasn't bluffing. In that silence, I realized something important. The property transfer, the tolls, the locked gate, those were just mechanics. The real blow had landed tonight, in the narrow strip of hallway where she'd looked me in the eye and seen that I was done playing her game. And there's no toll high enough to buy that back. By the second week, the rhythm of the farm had changed, not in the way seasons change, but in the way a machine grinds to a halt when someone pulls a crucial gear. The feed trucks stopped coming first. The drivers refused to pay the tolls, and the companies they worked for didn't see the profit in fighting a legal battle over a single client. Without feed, the livestock thinned. Without deliveries, schedules fell apart. By the third week, the produce buyers started pulling out of their contracts. A couple of them cited logistical difficulties, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to pay inflated transportation fees just to cross a strip of gravel. The crops that had been their pride, rows of vegetables and grain meant for market, began to wither. The smell of rot carried on the wind, faint at first, then unavoidable. The phone calls grew more frantic. I didn't answer any of them. But word traveled in a town this size. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that her father had been to the bank twice in 1 week, hat in hand, trying to restructure loans. The bank had listened, politely, of course, then suggested the unthinkable, mortgaging the farmhouse. They did it. And even that was just to keep the lights on and pay the bare minimum of the toll fees, hoping to limp through until some miracle loosened the noose. But Evan had no intention of loosening anything. In fact, he tightened it. At the start of the 4th week, Redline Development sent a new schedule, toll rates raised by 20%, with an additional seasonal surcharge that just happened to coincide with their harvest window. Her father's fury was legendary, but fury doesn't move trucks down a road they can't afford to use. Every day the gate stayed shut was another day the farm bled money. And bleeding money is slow, humiliating death for people who've spent their whole lives believing their name alone kept them untouchable. I drove past the property once, not close enough to be seen, but close enough to see the fields, the half-loaded trailers sitting idle, the stacks of crates that would never see a market. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. Not exactly. What I felt was colder, steadier, satisfaction measured in the way a problem solves itself once you stop trying to fix it for someone who never deserved the help in the first place. I thought back to the day 10 years ago when I'd signed that easement deal. I'd handed them security on a silver platter. They'd thanked me, then forgotten. Now, I'd taken it back, and they were remembering in real time just how dependent they'd been on something they never thought could disappear. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice, filed a lawsuit, or stepped foot on their land. All I'd done was shift a piece of paper from my name to someone else's. The rest, the rot, the empty silos, the unpaid bills, was just gravity doing its work. Their empire wasn't crumbling in one dramatic collapse. It was bleeding out slowly, in plain sight, with no one willing to step in and stop it. And I intended to watch every drop. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the world feels half asleep. I'd taken a corner seat in a small cafe downtown, the kind with scratched wooden tables and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. I was halfway through my second cup when my phone buzzed. A friend of mine, someone who still lived near the farm, had sent a short, almost gleeful message. Your ex's father just stormed into her house screaming. I thumbed back a simple about what. But before the 3 dots of his reply even disappeared, another message came through. Witnesses said his face was red, veins about to pop. Shouting, "Do you know what he just did?" Heard it from the porch across the street. I leaned back in my chair, letting the image form in my mind. Her father, that iron-willed patriarch who used to sneer at the idea that I could ever influence his world, now raging inside her home, spitting the words like a man who'd finally realized just how thoroughly he'd been played. Outside the cafe window, traffic rolled by lazily, people going about their lives with no idea that, a few miles away, an entire family legacy was in freefall. The harvest had failed, the bank was circling, and Redline's new toll schedule had made even the smallest deliveries financially absurd. The road they once bragged about, the one they thought no one could take from them, was now the very thing choking them to death, and they couldn't touch me for it. I pulled out my phone again, not to answer my friend, but to open my banking app. The balance blinked back at me, fatter now than it had been in years. The wire from the sale was still sitting there untouched, a reminder that all of this had been done without raising a single hand in anger. No lawsuits, no shouting matches, just signatures, stamps, and a quiet transfer of power. The barista came by to top off my coffee, and I caught my reflection in the dark surface of the cup, calm, unhurried. There was no rush of adrenaline now, no wild surge of victory. This was better. This was control. In her house, I imagined the scene. Her trying to explain to her father that she hadn't known, that she didn't think I'd ever pull something like this. Him roaring back, knowing full well that none of those excuses mattered. The land was theirs, but the lifeline was gone. Permanently. And I'd done it all without setting foot past their driveway. I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness of the coffee mix with the sweetness of the moment. This wasn't the kind of revenge you screamed about. It was the kind you built patiently, brick by brick, until the other side realized, too late, that the walls were closing in. When I finally stood to leave, I left a generous tip on the table. Not because I was celebrating, but because the job was done, the book was closed, and I could walk out into the cool afternoon knowing one simple truth. They'd spend the rest of their days trying to undo what I'd done, and they never would. Silent, permanent, and completely legal.